Someday, historians are going to look back upon this time, the early 21st century, and they're going to wonder, when was the tipping point, when was the point of no return for the deceased and defunct old American Republic? And the answer is going to be when the American public sought and elevated the rise of the self-proclaimed American Supermen. Kevin Williamson makes two additional valuable contributions at nationalreview.com this week to the ongoing and lonely struggle against bipartisan tyranny and narcissism and authoritarianism and what used to be the old American Republic. The first one came the day after Christmas, Monday as it happens, December 26, 2016. And it harkens back to Trump's carrier bailout as a harbinger of things to come, precisely because, or a continuation of Obamonomics, because it is government busyness, not the government's business, you see. See, the strange thing about bailouts, such as the one Donald Trump and Mike Pence just cooked up for the Carrier Air Conditioner Company, is that they are detested in theory but relatively popular in practice. That's the corruption aspect and dynamic. At least when they are put together by your guy. Tribalism, ladies and gentlemen. When Barack Obama boasted of having saved government motors, he wasn't scoffed at as a meddling know-nothing who used other people's money to save incompetent corporate managers and rapacious union goons from their own stupidity and excesses. He was considered a friend of the working man, or at least a well-intentioned would-be friend. The automaker bailouts were never generally popular. A small majority of Americans disapproved of them, but that majority was lopsided. 63% of Democrats approved of the bailouts, while 73% of Republicans opposed them. But did they oppose them out of free market principles, or did they oppose them because it was a Democrat who were carrying them out, or who was carrying them out? Well, political. Let's see if I can do my Yoda voice without coughing here.
Political tribalism is strong here.
Or
strong here. Political tribalism is.
The Trump-Pence carrier handout is supported by 40% of Democrats, 54% of independents, and a remarkable 87% of Republicans, according to a Politico poll. A carrier, it's worth noting, is not a bankrupt, struggling dinosaur manufacturer like Government Motors was. It turned a handsome profit of $4 billion last year. United Technologies, a large manufacturing conglomerate that owns Carrier along with its Otis Elevators and Pratt & Whitney Engines subsidiaries, operates a few facilities in Mike Pence's home state of Indiana. While the presidential campaign was underway, it announced it was going to relocate one of those facilities, a furnace plant, to Mexico, along with the jobs associated with it. A second facility was to be relocated as well, affecting a total of about 2,000 jobs. That this was happening in his vice presidential nominee's backyard was, of course, embarrassing for Trump. You can almost get the idea that Carrier saw a score to be made. Remember how I said that Trump is so easily manipulated? All you have to do is press the right buttons, and the biggest button is that big fat ego of his and his messiah complex. Trump likes to talk tough about trade and outsourcing, but his actual strategy with Carrier was the usual political approach. Drain the swamp? I don't think so. Showering the firm with other people's money. In exchange for at least $7 million in tax incentives, Carrier will do almost everything it was planning to do anyway. It will close Indiana facilities and it will move manufacturing and manufacturing jobs to Mexico. The fig leaf is 800 jobs that will be saved in Indiana, a figure that includes at least 300 positions that never were scheduled for offshoring to begin with. Carrier will be using those tax incentives to improve the automation in its U.S. facilities, i.e., to replace Indiana workers with robots instead of Mexicans. Oh, that, by the way, that's the cue for Trumplicans to start shrieking, Skynet! United Technologies, like General Electric and Lockheed Martin, is deeply enmeshed in government. It derives at least a quarter of its revenues from government contracts, 10% of it from the Department of Defense alone. It's not a company that can afford to have an enemy in the White House or the newly minted Trumpagon. Which is to say that Trump, who prides himself on his negotiating skills, highly overrated, I might add, entered the negotiation with a very strong hand. One so strong even he couldn't screw it up. Spending a few $1 million a year on more expensive labor in Indiana is chump change compared with the $5.6 billion in aircraft engines and components United sold to the federal government last year. Now, set aside for the moment the fact that using those federal contracts as leverage is kind of sort of technically illegal. Yeah, Trump's going to bring back the rule of law, Sure he is. See, it's difficult to imagine that a mere matter of law would prevent Trump from playing that card, and knowledgeable players such as former Indiana Lieutenant Governor John Mutz, who sits on the board of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, are frank about the larger financial stakes for United, as indeed is the firm's CEO, who told Jim Cramer that the possibility of losing its government contracts weighed on his decision to give Trump a win in Indiana, however symbolic. Drain the swamp, huh? In fact, Mutz's organization had put together a similar proposal and it was rejected by the company. Trump's deal was substantially the same, but it was coming from the incoming president. So here's a question for you. For all you Trumplicans out there who think that Trump is a genius and Trump can do no wrong, why didn't Trump get more in this deal? Well, the answer is probably straightforward. He didn't need more. Trump began his public life as a creature of the tabloid press in New York and is now a creature of social media. And literally a creature. He was an incompetent casino operator and hotelier, but he understands publicity and has a genuine gift for it. Without that, he'd just be another Fifth Avenue doofus who inherited a $200 million real estate portfolio from his daddy. There will be a day or two of headlines with the words Trump, deal, Indiana, and jobs, and that suits Trump. The emptiness of the deal will be documented and lamented by the 0.4% of Americans who actually pay attention to these things. The Carrier bailout is awful, of course. It is a case of two politicians using public funds to bribe a business into doing things that benefit them personally and politically while creating no long-term economic value. Corporate welfare, ladies and gentlemen. It's just not going to green energy firms is the only difference. Pence, Cuck Pence, who dropped his free market principles like the world's hottest potato once he got within sniffing distance of presidential power, can burnish his populist, read National Socialist credentials at the taxpayer's expense, and Trump can get ready to flit on to the next publicity stunt, which is all his presidency is going to amount to. But the emerging Superman politics here are truly poisonous. One of the genre conventions of superhero stories is the compression of all the world's drama into the immediate presence of the hero. Only his actions and intentions are relevant. People may be dying all over the world, but Superman saves Lois Lane. Although, to be fair, comic book movies have lately subverted that convention by focusing on the collateral damage done by the superheroes to the cities in which they live. You know, like Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, Captain America 3 Civil War. What that means in the context of our contemporary presidential politics is that no one takes any note of the fact that Carrier is not the only HVAC company in the United States or the only industrial concern in Indiana. Carrier has competitors that employ Americans, pay taxes, produce real economic value, and they have been put at a relative disadvantage by the political favoritism extended to Carrier. What about them? They're not on the stage, so they don't matter. It's not unlike what the Red Skull asked Captain America at the end of Captain America the First Avenger. What makes you so special? Well, what makes Carrier so special? Well, they were just a means to an end, glorifying Donald Trump. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, what is important to understand here is that this is not part of an economic development agenda. It is theater. Kabuki theater. It's the same BS as the past 8 years, ladies and gentlemen. It is an adolescent fantasy of political power, and whatever Superman happens, wherever he happens to land is where the action is. Nothing else is relevant. It doesn't matter that there is no broader logic at work. Small displays of efficacy can work to create an illusion of general efficacy that doesn't really exist. It is busyness as business, you see. This is, by his own account, Trump's conception of the purpose of the presidency. To go from situation to situation and make deals. Corruption on a colossal scale, in other words. State corporatism. Fascism. This is what it looks like in practice. You know, forget the armbands and extended arms and the coming out on the balcony and Il Duce and all that stuff. Forget the pageantry of it. In practice, this is what fascism looks like. Abuse of power to take command of the private sector, not through seizing the means of not through seizing the ownership of the means of production, but by putting it under the command of the state. That is state corporatism, aka fascism. This is what it looks like. Going from situation to situation and making deals in the way that Don Corleone made deals in The Godfather. But a long-term economic program for the United States, one that accounts for For example, that big automation investment in Indiana and what it means for the future of the American workforce is not a deal to be made. It is a general policy to be formulated where everybody is on the same level. Everybody is treated equally. Everybody is treated fairly. Not equality of result, equality of opportunity. And everybody is equal before the law. That's not what we're talking about here. Preventing a single symbolically important act of offshoring is a fundamentally different thing from understanding the underlying economic forces that make that offshoring attractive. In other words, you want to prevent more offshoring, or you want to reduce more offshoring or outsourcing of jobs, make the general business climate in this country friendly again. Cut the corporate tax rate. Dismantle the regulatory state. And there will be fewer and fewer reasons for American companies or foreign companies based in the United States to send jobs elsewhere. You have to make the cost of labor lower and more competitive with Mexico, Red China, Singapore, wherever, Malaysia. It's as simple as that. And that benefits the entire economy, not just one politically useful company, we say. Preventing a single symbolically important act of offshoring is a fundamentally different thing from understanding the underlying economic forces that make that offshoring attractive. As the Germans will tell you, it isn't just about low wages and governing in a way that puts those forces to work in Americans' interest. That was Reaganomics. That is not Trumpnomics. Trumpnomics is Obamanomics without the environmental green fetishism and obsession. Trumpnomics is Richard Gephardt economics. Remember Dick Gephardt? That's what Trumpnomics is, folks. Protectionist, mercantilist, fascist, statist. Trump's big idea so far is spending $7 million of other people's money to delay an embarrassing headline. And that's just the beginning, folks, of the statism to come. You see, Barack Obama is not an aberration, not a fluke, not an exception. I mean, a lot of us wanted to believe that that was the case, that Obama was a mistake. We'll get back to real American presidents and real American governance after his unfortunate detour was over. You know, not unlike we did with the election of George W. Bush in 2000 after the detour of Bill Clinton. But that's not what happened, is it? As Mr. Williamson wrote yesterday at nationalreview.com, there will surely be others like Obama, and in fact, just look at his successor. Trump is just like Obama in terms of character and temperament and mindset, strutting cosmic narcissism and ego, authoritarian impulses. They're the same. And that should frighten us a lot more than it does. And the fact that it doesn't, and that such people now are getting elected regularly, that tyrants are the norm, you know, the feature, not the bug, the rule rather than the exception, that is what should be frightening of all of us. And yet, because of tribalism, half the country sees it, and for the wrong reasons, and half the country doesn't because they benefit from it. It no longer matters. The Constitution no longer matters. We just want our tribe to be in power so we can screw over the other tribe. Rule of law and Constitution be damned. This is why I say that Douglas V. Gibbs is no longer credible as a constitutionalist, because he refuses to see the truth. Rock stars, the heroes who stormed the beaches at Normandy, or Jesus Christ himself, it doesn't matter who you are next to the president. For the past year, there have been cringe-inducing headlines reminding us that X, Y, or Z is Barack Obama's last as president. Theoretically. This is Obama's last Veterans Day as president, the cable news mouse said. Theoretically. As though that were the story. Barack Obama is about as beside the point as it is possible for a commander-in-chief to be on Veterans Day, because he isn't a veteran. And it isn't his day. It's not supposed to be. But remember, these days, all the days are the president's days. The Kennedy Center honored James Taylor, Mavis Staples, Al Pacino, Martha Argerich, and the Eagles. It is easy to see Barack Obama as a James Taylor fan. And the headlines announced Obama's last Kennedy Center honors as president. Allegedly. Barack Obama is many things, but he is not exactly what you would call a man of culture. I doubt he knew who Martha Argerich was before he was called on to present her with an award. But he's got people that do that sort of thing for him. Bring him up to speed. But everything Obama touches, everything the president touches is about the president. And that is true of all recent presidents, and especially true of this remarkably self-regarding one and his carbon copy successor. And God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten. Hey, wait! This is Obama's last Christmas as president, allegedly. And thank you, Wall Street Journal, for this one. His last Christmas vacation as president, too. Again, allegedly. Meanwhile, the president-elect this week publicly thanked himself for recent improvements in economic indicators. The U.S. Consumer Confidence Index for December surged nearly 4 points to 113.7, the highest level in more than 15 years. Thanks, Donald! Oh, I've seen that directly, folks. Making America great again already! Trump has also claimed personal credit for a year-end bump in the stock market. Now, presidents do this sort of thing all the time. Voters go along with it, too, blaming or rewarding presidents for developments in the economy that have precisely nothing to do with who occupies the Oval Office. You see, the American presidency has degenerated into a cult, a bipartisan, tribalistic cult. Historians a century or two hence, the aforementioned ones I began the video with, will look back on this development with horror as the point when the old American Republic was well and truly dead. To be a small r Republican in the 18th century was to be radical. The American founders were deeply suspicious of pomp and circumstance. It is not merely coincidence that the ban on an official national church, that and not having a manger scene at City Hall is what establishment of religion really means, came in the first item on the Bill of Rights. Many Republicans, small r, of the founding era were so suspicious of religious bureaucracies that it was not a foregone conclusion that the Catholic Church would be tolerated throughout the colonies. Indeed, for a time it wasn't. And they were even more suspicious of the claims of royalty. In the person of the English king, they found a compound of those sources of suspicion. A hereditary monarch who was head of state and head of church. The idea that a large, complex society enjoying English liberty could long endure without the guiding hand of a priest king was in 1776 radical. A few decades later, it became ordinary. Americans could not imagine living any other way. The Republican, small r, manner of American presidents was pronounced. There's a famous story about President Abraham Lincoln supposedly receiving a European ambassador who was shocked to see him shining his own shoes. The diplomat said that in Europe, a man of Lincoln's stature would never shine his own shoes. Well, then whose shoes would he shine? Lincoln asked. Oh, I love that. As American society grows more illiterate and the state of its moral education declines, the American people grow less able to engage their government as intellectually and morally prepared citizens. We are in the process, late in the process, of reverting from citizens to subjects. Subjects are led by their emotions. Is this starting to sound familiar? Populism, anyone? Mainly terror and greed. Carrier, anyone? They need not be intellectually or morally engaged. Their attitude toward government is a lot like that of Trump's old pal Roy Cohn. Don't tell me what the law is. Tell me who the judge is. Transactional politics? Corruption? For more than 2 centuries, we Americans have been working to make government subject to us rather than the other way around, and to make it our instrument rather than our master. But that requires a small r Republican culture, which is necessarily a culture of responsibility. Citizenship, which means a great deal more than showing up at the polls every 2 years to pull a lever for Team R or Team D, is exhausting. On the other hand, monarchy is amusing, a splendid spectacle, complete with dancing girls like the Rockettes, who will be performing, apparently, at Trump's inauguration 3 weeks from today. Boy, their legs are going to get cold. And a wonderful form of public theater. But the price of admission is submission. And it will remain that way until we get a conservative in the White House. Fat chance of that ever happening again, huh?